They say war reshapes machines, and with them, opinions. When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt first appeared over Europe, it didn't arrive as a graceful falcon. It arrived as a question, massive, blunt-faced, and heavier than the slim, nimble Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs it was meant to face. The Thunderbolt was at first mocked by German pilots as a flying barn door, but ridicule turned to caution, and caution into respect. The story of what Germany really thought of the P-47 is not a single moment of awe or fear. It's a long, stubborn re-evaluation, built on combat, damage assessments, and the ugly business of learning an enemy. From the first glance, the P-47 seemed the wrong answer to the problem of air combat. It was big. A thick, robust fuselage housing one of the most powerful radial engines of the war, a massive turbo supercharger and long ducting, and wings built to take punishment. Compared with the lithe Luftwaffe fighters, it looked ponderous, a brute of an airplane. That appearance fed the nickname. But what German pilots discovered over time was that the Thunderbolt's bulk hid several lethal virtues: tremendous dive speed, exceptional firepower, and a survivability that made it a nightmare to finish off. The P-47's heart was its engine and its systems. The airframe was built around a powerful radial that, paired with a turbo supercharger, allowed the Thunderbolt to perform at high altitude, where much of the bomber escort and air superiority fight played out. That turbo setup, with ducting running through the fuselage to a rear-mounted unit, was an engineering choice that gave the P-47 the ability to accelerate and sustain performance at altitudes that early Allied fighters struggled to reach. For German pilots accustomed to different performance envelopes, that altitude capability was a rude surprise. The Thunderbolt could appear from above with speed and punish an attacker who misjudged his energy. State armament reinforced the impression. Where many fighters carried 4 to 6 guns, the P-47 came with 8.50 caliber machine guns, a spread that translated into devastating short bursts against both air and ground targets. In the hands of a skilled gunner-fighter team, one passing run could shred control surfaces, rip ailerons, or set a fuel tank alight. That firepower, combined with the aircraft's structural heft, made it both a hunter and a battering ram. It could close with an enemy, survive hits that would put lighter fighters down, and return home. For Luftwaffe crews who measured performance not only in speed but in survivability and damage tolerance, this changed how they valued the Thunderbolt. Combat taught cruel lessons. In turning fights at low speed, the Thunderbolt was often at a disadvantage. Its weight and wing loading could not match the tiny turning radii of the Bf-109 or FW-190 in a slow, sustained dogfight. Yet the P-47 excelled in energy tactics. Dives, high-speed passes, and vertical maneuvers, where its mass and engine power became assets rather than liabilities. German pilots learned that if they tried to box a Thunderbolt into a turning duel, they might win the moment, but elsewhere, the Jug would use speed, altitude, and firepower to punish mistakes. The P-47's robustness also meant that hits, which would have downed other fighters, left it crippled but flyable. German gunners and fighter pilots increasingly found it difficult to translate a hit into a kill. Another theatre where German opinion shifted was in ground attack operations. The Thunderbolt adapted superbly to the fighter-bomber role. It could carry bombs, rockets, and extra ordnance, and its guns made short work of armoured vehicles and soft targets. When P-47s began hammering airfields, trains, and columns, Luftwaffe ground crews and pilots realized they faced an aircraft whose strategic effect went far beyond dogfights. The Jug's ability to absorb ground fire and still limp back to base made it invaluable in close air support and interdiction, a role that rewired German priorities on how to defend key assets. Technology alone didn't tell the whole story. Industrial scale and doctrine did. America's capacity to produce robust airframes in large numbers, to modify them rapidly and to train squadrons in coordinated energy tactics meant the P-47 didn't exist in isolation. It was part of a system German pilots respected that. They faced flights of Thunderbolts escorted by formation discipline, by mutually supporting pairs that used boom and zoom tactics, and later by aircraft whose endurance and payload were designed to sustain long, punishing campaigns. Respect for the aircraft became respect for the system that made it effective. There were tactical responses. Luftwaffe pilots developed ways to exploit the P-47's weaknesses, attempts to draw it into turning engagements, head-on passes where the Thunderbolt's frontal area was a liability, or attacks aimed at the undercarriage and flaps during low-speed operations. But every tactic had a cost. A single miscalculation against a well-handled P-47 could result in a furious, heavily armed counterpass. The air war over Europe became a chess game of trade-offs, where the Thunderbolt's designers had bought advantages in certain squares of the board that Germany had to learn to avoid. By mid-war, the tone of German commentary shifted. Flying barn door gave way to grudging admiration and technical analysis. Pilots and commanders began to respect the P-47 as a practical, unforgiving instrument of war, not elegant, but effective. That respect informed doctrine. Fight the jug on your terms if possible, but never underestimate what a disciplined formation of Thunderbolts could do. Intelligence reports and captured wreck analyses reinforced the impression that the Thunderbolt's survivability and firepower made it a strategic asset, one that redefined air superiority in the European theatre. The P-47's legacy, from the perspective of Germany's wartime observers, is twofold. On one hand, it proved that sheer engineering emphasis, power plant, protection of structure, heavy armament, could compensate for a lack of nimbleness. On the other hand, it exposed the limits of specialized design. The Thunderbolt was superb when used the way it was meant to be used and vulnerable when forced into someone else's style of fighting. For German pilots who had prized maneuverability and pilot technique, the Thunderbolt was a lesson in the shifting balance between pilot skill and industrial advantage. If you want a single image that captures the arc of German attitudes about the jug, picture this. A battered P-47 limps back over a shattered countryside, one wing smoking, a gaping hole in a control surface, yet the pilot keeps her steady and brings her down at a friendly field. Ground crews run out not to marvel at finesse, but to start the long work of repair. A Luftwaffe pilot, watching from a damaged FW-190, spits and mutters, sturdy as a tank and twice as angry. It's not poetry, it's the hard, practical admiration that emerges when technology meets the unromantic calculus of survival. The truth of what Germany thought about the P-47 is not a single verdict, but a transformation. From mockery to recognition, from underestimation to tactical caution, and finally to an acknowledgement that in modern war, brute strength, coupled with the right doctrine and industry, can be as decisive as agility. The jug did not seduce with elegance, it conquered by refusing to die.